Now it's my pleasure to introduce to the podium Debra Goostrey, who is the CEO of the UDIA in Western Australia, and she's going to speak jointly with Peter Boyer, Director of the Civil Group. And you'll note on the programme for today, they are really going to set the scene for us in terms of the affordability issue, of how we are presently developing housing estates in areas of high water table. So we probably wouldn't be here today if the price of sand hadn't increased so much over recent years. And Debra and Peter are going to set that issue for us, and I'm sure they'll be happy to take some questions afterwards. Okay, Debra.
Good morning, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be here. This issue has been floating around UDIA for a number of years. It really came out of the southwest during the last boom, where we were starting to struggle to get sand, and the price was escalating very rapidly, and our southwest committee said, what are we going to do? And we've been travelling this issue through our infrastructure committee, which some of you here today are on, to actually identify what are the possibilities and how can we actually progress this issue. One of the things that we wanted to do was to actually set the scene. It's really easy to talk about the detail without actually understanding how important it is to the greater context of what is going on. UDIA, for those of you who don't know, is an industry association that represents the property development industry. We've got members that come from the property development industry, a broad range of consultants. We've got government departments who are members and local governments that are members. So it is quite broad in context, and that helps us with our policy development. But one of the things that is really critical for people to understand, particularly post-GFC, is how important the property development is in underpinning the economic recovery of this country. It might not sound like what you do every day is helping Australia to recover from its economic woes, but it actually is critically important. To give you some idea, the property development industry around Australia represents some 7.3% of GDP, and if you combine indirect and direct, we're up to 13.5% of the national output. That is fairly substantial. But what is really interesting, and these figures are from 2008 and a few things have happened since then, is that we always look to the mining industry as a major driver of our economy. But in Western Australia, our investment represents about 58% of all investment. We are very influential in the outcomes of this economy. And if you actually include indirect as well as direct investment, the property sector represents about 63% of all investment. So what I'm saying to you is, as far as economic recovery goes, this industry is critically important. Nationally, we sit fourth behind business services, manufacturing and mining, but in WA, the property industry sits third, surpassing manufacturing, and it contributes about 9.4% to gross state output. I'll stop quoting figures to you soon, but I really wanted to be able to hammer home, this is a very important industry, and if we don't resolve some of the issues that you're discussing today, it will affect the whole of the Western Australian economy. Western Australia nationally, our property sector is growing faster than anywhere else in Australia. We were in 2008, we've got to refresh the figures, but we are still a very strong growth in our property sector. And we represent 17.5% of the workforce. So if the property industry starts to sag, so does employment, which is why the government has been extremely keen to support the property development industry. This somewhat complex diagram tells you the pathway over the last decade of what's been going on in the industry. You'll notice this big spike here. It's a little artificial because we do average prices, but that is when we hit the affordability crisis, when the amount of lots being sold was right up. We ran out of... Sorry, I always do that, press the wrong button. We started running out of land supply. We had a spike in the lots sold, and the price just went through the roof. there is a direct relationship between land supply and price. That very high peak up there is a little artificial. That represents one very, very hot weekend where about $48 million of coastal property was sold in a new development. So it is a little artificial, but it is indicative of how bad things got. And that was the time when our Southwest Committee, when all of these lots were being sold and we had very little left, that the real challenges started in and around land supply. We just didn't have enough to go around. What the government has recognised is that this industry needs to be stimulated in times when it's struggling. So they had the first homeowner grant boost, and it was very deliberate. It was all about making sure that those jobs in this industry weren't lost. But the industry, whilst it can be stimulated, also can suffer some very big downers. This is nationally, and the grey areas are where there were interest rate rises. So you can see that we are very, very susceptible in this industry to interest rate rises. When we go back to that affordability crisis, we can actually see how much has changed. Back in 2001, most of Australia was affordable and Perth was very affordable. But by 2006, nearly every city had reached some level of affordability crisis. UDIA last year compiled a hotspot report for the state government because we were starting to get quite concerned once more about the land supply shortage. We have moved through, because of the various interest rate rises and some uncertainty about mining tax and other things that's made the industry a little bit subdued, but we have been going through with the government to make sure that we can actually deliver the land that we need to keep up to the market. The problem is sand supply does keep coming up over and over again as one of the barriers. Is it a problem if we run out of land? Well, yes, it's a huge problem. Right around Australia, we have problems with the supply of housing. The Reserve Bank outlined their concerns. They said if population growth were to remain as strong for an extended period of time and we don't change the mix of housing that's being constructed, it's likely that we'll need to devote a higher share of GDP to housing than has been historically the case. That's their mumbo-jumbo for saying house prices are going to go through the roof if we don't get this equation right. So what's actually been going on? You can see from that graph, for the first time in 50 years, our population is now ahead of our housing. This is right the way around Australia. We do not have enough houses right now to house our population. We are in significant undersupply. This is in Western Australia, and you can see on the far right-hand side of the graph just how much we are in undersupply, and it will be increasing. Some states in New South Wales, it's diabolical, the lack of housing supply. But it's not because people are not spending as much money. As a share of GDP, housing is still as big as it ever was. The problem is our houses are actually a lot bigger than they were. What we're doing is investing in houses that are this big, and we're investing in less of them. So we have got the McMansions coming through, but that is not keeping up with our population growth. It is simply meaning we're spending as much money as we ever did on building, dwelling construction. And this is having an interesting roll-on effect. At the turn of the last century, I was going to say turn of the century and forget there's been another one since, but at the turn of 100 years or so ago, we had about 5 people per dwelling. And that got right down, and that was because we had more affluence and there were enough houses around, and so we had less and less people per dwelling. And you would expect that trend to continue given that we're an ageing population and we've got more single households. We have recently reversed that trend and there are more people per household, and that is a direct reflection of affordability and the number of houses that are actually available to the population. So we are going to see more and more people living in the same house. This can be people staying longer at home with mum and dad, lucky mum and dad, People, families, multiple families living in a house, or people, instead of going out in a flat by themselves, actually going into a house with 5 or 6 friends to help defray some of the costs. So what does this mean in the West Australian market? We are currently fairly flat in what has been going on. We were artificially stimulated in Western Australia. This is a map of sales, recent sales. The darker the colour, the more that sales there were. We've been going through an artificial period last year when the first homeowner grant boost was stimulating the marketplace. So we had actually some good sales during 2009. At the end of the first homeowner grant boost, we dropped about 18%. That gap will be filled by the emerging return of the middle market, all the people that already own homes that are looking to upgrade. The dilemma we've got there is when people have got their own homes, they tend to get very skittish about buying another one, and anything can put them off. The extended election this year, and certainly interest rate rises, puts people off. They decide they don't want to move, which is why we're finding that the existing houses, the listings have blown right out there, and we've got a slowdown in the marketplace at the moment. But what that's actually doing is creating latent demand going forward. We will finally hit a point where people go, actually, I'm comfortable now, and like lemmings jumping off a cliff, everybody will suddenly start saying, I've been dying to move for 3 years, and you'll get a bit of frenzy in the marketplace. And again, I keep coming back to, what does this mean to the people in the room? If we can't resolve some of the issues that are being discussed today, we will not be able to keep up with demand, and we will get the price housing spikes again. We will struggle to keep up. And what that means in the longer term is we need to attract people in for the mining industry, and if we haven't got an affordable, reasonable place to live, they won't come here. And we're starting to see that our mining, the multiplier effect from the mining industry is going with the people that are fly in, fly out from other states. It's critically important that we provide a reasonable, affordable place for people to live. This was when we were complaining about the potential of land shortages last year. This is the forecast construction over 6 months, and this is the situation in December 2009. There was very, very little activity on the forward plans for most of the major developers. This is actually comes from our data, which we do a survey of the 40 largest developers in Western Australia. We do it every quarter so we can monitor what's going on. At that stage, there were only 1,400 lots forecast to be constructed over the next 6 months, which is frighteningly low, because just before the last land supply shortage, we had about 3,700 lots forecast for construction. So we were very, very, very low, and we were not even forecasting construction to meet the current demand at the time. Thankfully, in many ways, although it's negative that we've had a slowdown in the industry, it has allowed for some recovery in the construction market. So we aren't as desperate as we were before, but if there is a sudden pickup in demand, we are going to struggle enormously. And we all know that sand and drainage and getting all of those things right is a major component of the development industry. So what are some of the other things that are impacting on us? When we're actually looking at the industry, we go back 10, 15, 20 years ago, and life was a whole lot simpler then, and every developer will look back fondly and say, it used to be easier. And the approval system reflected that. We were in fairly well-drained land, it was flat, it was sandy, you chop it up, you put it out there, and people will come and buy it. Unfortunately, we're now in highly constrained land. We are in poorly drained land. We're in environmentally sensitive land. There are all these factors that are impacting. So how does the government respond? That's the planning system today. And unfortunately, that's only one of 4 slides. I wasn't going to bore you with all of them. It was just supposed to be indicative. We have more complexity in our approval system, and that's an understatement. Not only do we have government departments wanting more information, we have more government departments wanting similar information. So one of the key lobby aspects from UDIA is to be able to try and say, you need a lead agency choose who it is, and you guys in government can go and fight it out, but we don't want to be the ones fighting it out between all the government agencies that are involved on key issues. And certainly as we move through, we are going to find that water is just such a critical issue. We're now starting to find that the watering licences for public open space, the Department of Water can't guarantee it, in some cases aren't issuing it. We are finding that there are high-level meetings on an ongoing basis about urban water and what is going to happen. We've got a function coming up at the end of, well, mid-December, where Marie de Lacy, the Acting Director General for the Department of Water, will be releasing their dry season strategy. And it is very frightening at the moment, because for those of you who are technical, you'll talk about your gigalitres and all those types of things. I like things fairly simple. This winter, only the equivalent of 10 summer days' use has flowed into the catchments. That's it, 10 summer days, and I think we've had 2 or 3 of them already. So by January, we're going to be into negative, and we're going to be drawing down on other previous resources. Obviously, we get a lot out of the aquifer, but we will be in negative. We're not replacing what we're using. And if we have a negative year next year, we are going to be in really big trouble. They're highly reliant on the desal plant to actually make sure that we can stay with enough water to move through. So all of the things that you guys talk about is critically important, and water recycling is of paramount importance to us. So people say, there is an argument for it, saying, well, can't we just shut the gates? Say nobody's allowed to come into Australia anymore. Well, a lot of our growth will actually be from natural growth. We've actually experienced increasing birth rates, and we have a very strong migration program. And believe me, we actually need a strong migration program. The reason for it, and many of you, not all of you, many of you in the room will be affected by this, that by the middle of this century, the people aged over 65 years will double. And that means only 2.7 people working for everybody aged over 65 if we don't continue a very strong migration program. In the 1970s, we had 7 people working for everybody aged over 65, and we're currently at about 5 people working for everybody aged over 65. So to actually shut the door and say no more population means that our actual economic standing will diminish enormously, and the care of the aged will become very, very difficult. But having said this, we're looking at a forecast of 36 million people by 2050. That's a big Australia, and certainly people look at it and start to panic. But growth is not new, and while the forecast is for a 60% increase in our population over the next 40 years, we actually grew at 75% over the last 40 years. As Bernard Salt says, we've been there before. I can only hammer home, and Peter, who is chair of our infrastructure committee, will go into some of the more in-depth things we've been doing with sand supply and drainage and the affordability issues. But I wanted to start right from the beginning and say this industry is critically important to our economy. Our population will continue to grow. We are going to struggle in the long term to keep up with the land supply, and we are already in critical housing supply shortage, and that situation is forecast to get worse. So every time you hear reports from overseas talking about a housing bubble, they're talking about comparing it to countries in oversupply like America. Australia is in quite critical undersupply, so this industry will continue to grow for many, many years to come because our population will continue to grow. I'd like to now introduce Peter Bowyer, and I did it, Peter. I'm dead on time. It's all right, we're sharing a presentation. There's nothing worse than the first person hogging all the time. I'd like to introduce Peter Bowyer. Peter Bowyer is director with the Civil Group, and he's also the very, very hardworking and dedicated chair of the UDIA Infrastructure Committee. And the Infrastructure Committee consists of a whole range of people, including developers, engineers, specialist hydrologists, local government, the Water Corp, Department, we've got a whole lot of people, and he's also speaking on behalf of our Urban Water Committee and some of the work they've been doing. Could you please welcome Peter?